Okay, look, your eyes did not deceive you. The thumbnail and title are correct. This is a digital painting tutorial, and I am indeed painting Mr. Beast as the Joseph Ducrot meme, I think. Look, there it is. But I haven't taken leave of my senses just yet, no. There are many reasons why these two unlikely figures should be blended together in a capriccio, whimsical way as I like to do. How did this come about? And where did the inspiration strike? Well, when my last Carmi Leyendecker video started racking up some views, my kids started calling me an internet sensation and the next Mr. Beast. And though I know I'm not going to be the next Mr. Beast, that did get me thinking. Who in art history has been an internet sensation? And one stuck out. It's an artist you'll most likely never have heard of, but an image you'll most probably know, especially if you're a fan of the meme. Joseph Ducrot's self-portrait of the artist in the guise of a mocker. It took a few hundred years, but old Joe got there, gaining notoriety in an arena he could never have envisaged, but would definitely have approved of. We'll talk about why later on. But then that got me thinking, who could I mash up into the painting? And like the kid said, there's only one internet sensation of recent years that stood out, and whose use of his face on thumbnails has become as synonymous as the content he shows, Mr. Beast. As ever, we will dive deeper into the many links between this pairing, and more art history facts as we go. But for now, let's get to work. Okay, so for today's tutorial, I'm going to be using ArtRage Vitae, which if you're new to the channel or new to digital art, it's well worth a look. As I said in my last video, it's an amazing program. It's on desktop, mobile and tablet. And if you come from a fine art background, definitely give it a go. Okay, so I'm just going to be setting up my new painting here. And as you can see, I'm choosing the size and dimensions. You go to File, New Painting. I wanted this painting to be quite large to get the detail in the face and all those kind of things. You can set it to print sizes if you need it on A3 or A4. You can change whether it's in pixels or centimeters. But for this one, I wanted it 4x5, so it would look good on social media and things like that. So went for 4000 by 5000. I'm now changing my canvas settings. So for the Ducrot painting, I wanted it to be on a canvas. So you go down to the image of the canvas picture there, and you can select from a selection of ones that ArtRage have. There's decorative ones and papers and all sorts of fun things, and it changes the way the paint reacts on the canvas. As you lay it down, you'll see a little thumbnail in a second of when you change the grain and roughness, and the paint reacts differently as it would do whether you're painting on paper or card, whatever it might be. So I wanted a fine canvas for this, and as you can see with that little blue stroke there, as you change the grain and the roughness, it will give you a little teaser of what it will look like, a little taster. And you can change it up and you can see how the brush strokes are going to react on the canvas. You can change the canvas lighting, so if you build up more texture on there, it will create shadows across the canvas and do all kinds of clever things like this. But for now, I'm keeping the canvas lighting on. I'm tweaking the roughness a little bit, so the paint glides across, but you still get a little bit of the canvas coming through. And you'll see why later on, as I want to create a bit of texture across the kind of coat, particularly of Ducrot's self-portrait. So I've got it all set up, and I click OK, and off we go. There's our canvas set up, and you can position it on the screen. I'm working on the Surface Studio 2 here, so it's a big, large screen I'm working on, but it works perfectly fine on whatever size you have at your disposal. Okay, so we've got our canvas all set up and we're ready to go. So we're going to get on to the fun bit now of sketching in our figure. So on the left hand side of the tool wheel, you'll see all the different tools there. So we're selecting the pencil tool, and ArtRage has many different types of pencil, whether you need smoothing on, if you need it rougher, shading, it's got all those kind of things. I've also imported my own brushes here, you'll see, but I don't think they're available to get at the moment, which is a real shame, but I'll let you know in the comments below if they do become available. But they work much the same as the normal pencils on ArtRage. I just downloaded them a couple of years ago, and I just found that I really like them and just stuck with them. I've kind of habit really. But as you can see, I've been testing out all the different pencils here to see what would work, and I stick with what I know, and you'll find what works for you. But there's enough options there to kind of get on with, and we're going to be painting over this anyway. So find a pencil that works for you and your style. As you can see, I'm working through them here. There's lots of different options. you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner where the little blue line is and it says 20%. That is where you can expand or make the stroke slimmer or fatter. If you drag along it with your stylus, you can bump up the size or drag it back the other way to the left and it will shrink it down. You can also tap on it and it will give you keyboard to kind of input what size you want if you really want to jump from kind of say 2% or right up to 500%. That would take you a wee while of dragging, so it's worth just remembering that. So we're ready to go. I'm resetting the rotation. I've cleared my layer here and I'm off we go. We start sketching in Ducrot as he did a couple of 100 years ago. And so as you can see here, I just sketch in the shapes. All the line part is to me is just shapes, form, lines. It's really rough. There's no precise science to it. I don't follow any technique that you might see like the Loomis one, which works really, really well. And if it works for you, you go for it. But for me, all I do is really roughly kind of draw the lines until I kind of get it right in my head, really. I'll overdraw and overdraw and overdraw. And as you can see, I kind of roughly knew where I wanted these things, and I'll place them, you know, in a good position and then start going into the detail a little bit more. And I wanted to see with the lines on the face there, I'm just trying to line it in because obviously I'm not painting Ducrot into this one, I'm painting Mr. Beast. And here's the man himself. So we're moving on to the face bit here. And again, I will use guidelines, really, almost plumb lines. So I'll draw lines down from the eye where it should line up with the mouth. I'll try and find kind of correlation across the face where the line of the eyes meets the top of the ear, and just try and kind of guide myself around the face. You'll see with the way I sketch as well, I will make kind of strange shapes across the face there, like angles and blocks, and that's to kind of show me later on where light and shade are for my values. And so when I start painting in and adding the dark bits first, I know where those angles need to be of the color. It's not a precise science. It doesn't work all the time. Sometimes I've got to redraw faces many, many times. And as you'll see, this Mr. Beast drawing doesn't particularly look very much like him, but it's close enough. So we've got it. I've duplicated the layer so I don't lose it. And with the top layer, I'm now trying to position it onto the Ducrot, and it looks a little bit of a mess. And sometimes it's quite hard to do this because of your guidelines below. But I'm trying to make it so he fits into the painting and doesn't look odd. And I think I've kind of got it right there. Sometimes I tweak things as I go and move things over a little bit. It's quite a hard one, really, with the big collar on this one, because you can't really see the neckline. So again, I went back and revisited it, thought it needed to come over to the right a little bit. But I did want to emphasize the head of Mr. Beast on this painting because Ducrot's is quite large on there, but also because of the nature of this tutorial, which we'll get into in a little while, dealing with the kind of zeitgeist of thumbnails and YouTube and things like this. Mr. Beast often portrays his face quite large on his work and on his thumbnails. It is quite prominent, and so it screams, this is a Mr. Beast video and you want to watch this. And I think Ducrot would have appreciated that because he very much was playful with his images. And we'll talk on that in a little bit, but I think he very much had an emphasis on the face and was very into kind of features, emotions, and you know what they conveyed. So having the face a little bit more prominent is important. Now, being faced with a blank canvas or even a canvas with a sketch on it can be a daunting thing. It can be scary, and it's best to just get paint down. So that is exactly what we're going to do. But before we do that, we need to make sure that our paintbrush is set to the right settings. And ArtRage this is where it really comes into its own. You can change the thickness, you can change the kind of flow of the paint, the loading on the brush, the stiffness, whether it's a square head, a round head brush. And so as you can see here, I'm just testing out a few different kind of thicknesses of the paint on the canvas, seeing how it flows, seeing whether the canvas shows through a little bit. And I'm using my palette knife, which you can see in the middle of the tools on the side, to just drag it about a little bit, because the palette knife is going to be our friend on this one. We are going to use it a lot to kind of get that kind of rough paint flow that Ducros kind of obviously got, particularly on the jacket. So as you can see, I'm not worrying too much about going over the lines. I am slapping the paint down and going from dark to light, and so I'm just trying to get the shadow bit areas in first and build up as we go. And much like the Leyendecker Kami on my last video, I've duplicated the sketch drawing and made 2 copies of them and put one onto the top layer, and I'm painting in between them. I've set the opacity of the top one to 50% so I can kind of lightly see it, but it doesn't take over the painting. And I'm painting below it. And this is so it acts as a guide. So what I don't want to do is start blocking in and I can't see what I'm painting then. I've lost all the kind of work that I've done below it. It's a bit of a hack, it's a bit of a cheat, but we're working digitally, so do it. I mean, it's much the same as using thinners on paint, so you can see your charcoal lines or your pencil lines below it. It's a tool at our disposal, so let's use it. So as you can see, I'm trying to kind of roughly get the colors, you know, borderline correct. I'm not using the color picker. As I mentioned before, if you use the color picker on photos, there's 1,000,001 pixels in that photo and it's not necessarily going to be the right one. So start training your eye and your senses to kind of gauge the color wheel on the side to be right. Now, as you can see, the color wheel has not been my friend in this bit. Mr. Beast is looking a little bit Donald Trump-esque there. He has got a good glow on him, but that doesn't matter. These are the underpaint blocking in. All I want to do is kind of get that shade, light and shade, and the shapes on his face correct as we go. And also, having a kind of warmer undercoat is no bad thing. The Renaissance artists and Baroque artists all used to do it. It means the paint that we put on top will glow a little bit more and it will have a bit more vibrance. Now, as some of you may notice, I haven't been completely faithful to the Ducros. The light on his painting of his cheeky face there is kind of coming from the right-hand side and hitting his, you know, above his forehead and his cheeks. And I've not really done that because the photo of Mr. Beast, the shade was from the other side. I could have worked at it a little bit more, but there was enough light kind of hitting across the front of Ducros that I felt, okay, you know, this will still work with having a bit more shade there. I didn't put quite as much in as on the Mr. Beast one. As you'll see later on, I kind of tone it down a little bit. So it still is kind of coherent across the canvas and isn't too jarring. But we're creating a meme. Oh, I've got to get out of that habit. My daughter kills me every time I call it a meme. We're creating something that was a throwaway thing. These were quickly made and still are quickly made kind of throwaway images where they were crudely put together for comic effect on the internet. So don't read too much into it. I'm not trying to remake the wheel. I'm not trying to rewrite a piece of artwork. I'm having a bit of fun, and hopefully in the process, it's less about the final result really in this one. It's more to show you techniques and a little bit of art history about that, so we can learn, you know, because if we're not learning, we're not living really, and that's what I always say. So don't worry too much about that. Like I said, the end result isn't the goal here. It's more to kind of show you techniques, what's possible with ArtRage, what's possible with digital art, and have a little bit of fun with it. So a lot of the things I'm doing here can be utilized in other art programs. If you don't use ArtRage, the same kind of things, building up light to dark, blocking in, all the same kind of techniques can be used in whatever program you use. So before we get into the links between Mr. Beast and Ducros and his self-portrait, of which there are many, I've not just plonked him in there, you know, for the sake of it. Bear with me on this. When we get to the face details, I'll explain a little bit more. I always like to give a little bit of the history behind the artist of who we're paying homage to, and so we can learn a little bit about him and maybe give him a bit of a resurgence again. So Joseph Ducros, he was born in Nancy in France in 1735. His dad was an artist and he grew up in a Rococo world of art and training from his various teachers, and mainly worked in oil pastels, which you can see kind of spill over into the way he handles paint in that kind of dry paint, but still rough and smooth. It's a strange one when you kind of delve deeper into his artwork, when you look closely at them. There's so much detail in there, but they are still quite loosely and expressively painted, which again is a kind of spillover from his oil pastel early days. From his teachers, he was exposed into a world of dignitaries and landed some amazing commissions that again further propelled him into this French royal world. He was asked to paint the portrait of Marie Antoinette, which all of a sudden opened the door to some huge commissions and working with the French royal family for many, many years. He actually did the last portrait in oil pastels, a sketch, if you will, of Louis XVI before the French Revolution kicked off, and Ducreux quite wisely fled the country. He was really worried that his links with the French royalty would not serve him well, so he escaped to London, and when he went, poor Louis had his head chopped off, so he did the right thing, Ducreux. And he continued his work and returned to France later on, and worked more and more in oil paints later on by this stage. And he started experimenting with self-portraits a lot more, and whereas his portraits of royalty were very softly painted and done in a serious manner with impeccable detail, his self-portraits are a completely different style of art really for him. His self-portraits are considered a term called tronie, which is a Dutch phrase meaning portraits containing exaggerated expressions. I think you can see that in this kind of smug look to the camera as he points. It's not really seen in art up until that point, really. And when he exhibited it in salons and at different places, some people loved them and some people really did not like them at all. The gestures were so exaggerated and so playful and humorous that it kind of took people off guard, really. It was an interplay between the sitter and the artist and the public viewing it, which had not really been done. It's almost breaking the fourth wall, if you will. And Ducreux really became fascinated with this idea of physiognomy, a belief that dates as far back as Aristotle. Physiognomy is the idea that the inward character of a person can be determined by judging their expressions and facial features. And he really went down this path that what you see on the face can determine what the character is. And this is really what set me on the path thinking about the link between Mr. Beast, the thumbnails, YouTube in general, and how he became a meme. Joseph Ducreux's image became a meme. We read so much into people's faces on pictures, photos, paintings now. It's almost taken for granted, but if you think about a thumbnail that pops up on your screen, you determine whether you want to click on that video, maybe within a couple of seconds, maybe even less. And often that is to do with the person's face on the thumbnail. And Mr. Beast has really got into it just as much as Ducreux did, looking at the science behind it, the head placement. He even recently has made videos looking at which would be more popular on his videos. Video thumbnails with his mouth open and ones with his mouth shut. And he determined that the mouth shut ones were more popular. Hence why I painted Mr. Beast with his mouth shut. It might not help me in terms of getting Mr. Beast's kind of numbers on the views, but every little helps. So yeah, it was these self-portraits that Ducreux did, which depicted him yawning, shushing the viewer, creating an interplay between the sitter and the viewer, which hadn't been seen before. And they really are quite interesting and very humorous. And this portrait that we're dealing with, the artist in the guise of the mockingbird is no different. And it's a wonderful piece of artwork, and no wonder it became a meme. So we'll come back to Art History Corner in a little while and talk a bit more about Mr. Beast and about Ducreux and his late resurgence into the world of the internet and how he became a bit of a sensation. But before that, we're going to look at the details now. We're going to get to the nitty-gritty of the painting. And we're going to close in on Mr. Beast's face. And as you'll see, first of all, I generally go in, once I've got the light and dark blocking in, I'll generally go in and start painting on the eyes, because I feel with a lot of portraits, if you get the eyes right, they're, as the saying goes, they're the gateway to the soul. But generally, if you get the eyes kind of looking good and looking well, it sets the tone for the rest of the painting, and usually things go pretty well after that. If they're looking boss-eyed or slightly skew-whiff, or you've not got the colour tones right there, the rest of the painting will be thrown off. So as you can see, I've zoomed in a little bit, and you've got to remember I'm working on a very big screen here, so I could have zoomed in a little bit more, but it was already pretty big to work on. So I'm just trying to feather in the details a little bit. Again, working with the dark areas first, just getting the shape before we start adding the structure to it. And much like the Ducreux, when you zoom in on his works, he doesn't just use flesh tints and straight out of the tube. There was a lot of tones going on there. There was a lot of greens in the skin. There was a lot of blues in the skin, which I'll try and recreate to kind of create that 3D sense and the sense of light hitting Mr. Cheek's quite prominent cheekbones and his kind of jowly bits around his beard. Now, as you'll see throughout this painting, as I lay the paint down, I'll take off the pencil layer that's on the top, our guide layer, our hack, and I'll place it back on if I need the detail there. So you'll see in a little while, I need to kind of roughly see where the nose is, so I'll put it back on. But I still want it to be expressive, so as you see, I'll put it back on there, but I'll take it off every now and then because I want to eye it in. I'm looking at the picture of Mr. Beast there, and I still want it to feel fresh. I don't want it to feel too constrained by the lines that I've drawn before. They are just a guide, remember. So like I said earlier on, the kind of angled lines across the face that create the 3D structure across his cheekbones and stuff, that's where the light and shade kind of stop and start, and they will help me to make it look more 3D, make it look more presence. And through a couple of opacity layers later on, you'll see that's where we create the kind of the flesh on the bone, really, the depth to the painting. Because all the while through this blocking in and detail phase, it will look quite flat, and paintings always go through many stages of looking pretty rubbish, but I particularly find this stage is one of the ones where you're kind of tempted to just put your stylus down and go and get a cup of tea, really, because it doesn't look great. But you've just got to plow on, trust the process, trust your own skill, and experiment. And if it doesn't go right, you've not wasted canvas, you've not got paint all over the carpet. It is just the back button you need to press, or just overpaint it, clear the layer, start again. Like with anything, enjoy the process of getting mistakes wrong, getting things wrong, because that's where you really, really learn. Now, just as a note as well, as I continue to kind of feather in the details, you'll see on the background there, and in some areas where I've used the palette knife, the paint is almost stripped back right to the canvas. You'll see on the left-hand side there. And that's where the paint I put onto the canvas wasn't so thick that when you drag it about with gusto, that it would just spread. It actually started to kind of break up and show the canvas below it, which is exactly what I wanted. But fear not, because that actually can add to the painting. It can add to the style of it. When you look at classical paintings and paintings from masters, they have so much depth, particularly in the backgrounds and on textures, where paint has been loaded on top of each other through glazes, opacities, using thinners on their paint. Obviously, we don't have those tools on digital. We can add thinner to the paintbrush on ArtRage, which I sometimes do, I sometimes don't. We have modern tools like multiplies to darken areas and add shadows, which I've not used on this painting at all. I really wanted to kind of keep it as lo-fi as I could. So all I've used on later on, you'll see, is opacities. Again, recreating the notion of thinning the paint, whether you're in acrylics with water or oils with terps or other kinds of mediums on there. And we can build up those layers so we see a little bit of the paint below it. And so don't worry if the paint starts getting a little bit scratchy, that can add to it. You've got to remember with these paintings also, some of them have not weathered well. They, look quite rough, and it always surprises me when you see masters paintings up close, actually how damaged and rough and in areas they are, and how much crackler has gone on the glazing, and they are often rougher than you actually think. We see small images of them on computers or TV and they look fantastic. When you step up close, that's where the magic is, I find, with art. Something that can be so rough when you look at it in the detail, when you take one step back, it all blends together. Your eye does the work and it looks incredible. And Ducrot is no different when you look at his hand, and in certain areas around his nose and cheek. When we zoom in on it, they are loosely painted. There is detail there which he has then painted thickly on top for the lighting on his collar, or the little kind of Vermeer-esque glints of light across his knuckles. And it's only when we step back that we appreciate, oh, that works, that come together, that's a knuckle, that's not just paint splodged on willy-nilly. And that is something I often try and achieve with my digital paintings. It looks a mess when you're close up. You zoom back out from it, or quite often what I'll do, I'll turn my Surface screen to the side and look at it from across the room. I'll make it quite big on the screen, and how does it look? I mean, you've got to remember a lot of paintings are meant to be viewed from a couple of feet away, and some paintings are meant to be viewed from a lot further away. So bear that in mind. Don't beat yourself up on details, particularly when you're doing paintings like this. They will come together as you step back. So we're starting to get a little bit more detail in there. As you can see, that kind of icy blue tint across his cheekbone, and some greens thrown in there, because particularly around the eye sockets and around, underneath the bottom lip, it's never just pink. Our skin is not pink. You'll see a lot of artists will paint a base layer in greens and blues, and that's because our skin is a translucent thing. It's a semi-translucent thing. There is so many pigments within our skin, and when I'm working with my kids, showing them how to paint and different things like this, their first instinct is to either mix red and white together to get pink, or use flesh tint straight out of the tube and just slap it on. And they always look at me like I've lost my mind when I start using greens and blues across the face. But that is what the skin is like. We reflect so much light from around us. We have so much kind of depth to our skin. It's doing it a disservice if we don't put it in there. And it really helps create the 3D nature of it, for our eye sockets, the depth, and for our cheekbones. And once we start adding those highlights later and the really dark bits, that's when everything comes together and it starts to really pop. Now, before we speed things up a little bit again on the process, because we don't want to spend ages watching every single blocking in bit, you kind of get the gist of where I'm going on it so far, but we will revisit different areas of note. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Always remember to keep saving your file as you go. So you click File, Save Painting. If you've already created a file name for it, Save As or Save. Because although ArtRage has an automatic saving system, every hour it will save for you, it does run into trouble sometimes. Like any art program, things can crash, you can have a power cut. ArtRage Vitae is very stable. I've only encountered a handful of issues with it. So don't worry too much if you don't. If you've been working for over an hour, it will save for you. But always remember, it's good practice every now and then, especially if you've done quite a technical bit or a bit of detail or something that you're really, really happy with. Just click the file save, and just for peace of mind, crack on. Now, although I'm pretty happy with it at this stage, there was something not quite right with it. And this is where digital painting comes into its own. I created another layer, rubbed out everything around the head, and started having a little play positioning. I felt his head was a little bit too far over to the left. So I moved the head across and then blended the layer back down and filled in any gaps around it. It was just niggling at me. There was something not quite right. And I felt that as I continued with the details, it would get worse as it went on. So I moved him a little bit over to the right, because otherwise, although that collar was kind of getting in the way a little bit, it was really hard to kind of position and where his neckline would be. But I knew that there was a little area on his shoulder, just on the right hand side. There's two patches of white light, one on his collar and one on his shoulder, and that's where his shoulder blade was. And if I hadn't have moved it across, the gap between his neckline and where his shoulder blade, rounded shoulder area would have been too far. So, note to self, and don't worry if things go pear-shaped, there is always a way around it. Like I said, I just erased all around, left the head, moved it across and blended in the gaps. Through the areas of detail, there were some bits that I really enjoyed painting on this, the buttons particularly. I love just doing a little fleck of white paint and a little fleck of kind of slightly bluish, greenish just around and adding the dark bit. It was great. You really see the genius of artists when you look closely at how they create these little moments within their painting, and I really enjoyed that. What I didn't enjoy doing was the jacket and the hat. The jacket is a strange one. It almost looks kind of leathery but canvassy at the same time. It has so much kind of cracks and texture when you zoom in on the original painting. It has a life to it. It has led a life that it has seen a few storms and probably ridden a few horses, and it was really, really quite hard to kind of convey that, coupled with the fact that the image of the meme and Ducrot's painting has been reproduced many times, with much lighter lighting across the whole canvas, where it almost looks kind of greeny in the background and yellowy across the jacket. And then this example, which I think is more akin to the original, which was much darker, much more chiaroscuro, the interplay of light and dark across the canvas. So you'll see there that the other Ducrot there from the meme, his jacket's very yellow in that one, and I didn't really like it because it almost looked oversaturated. The reds around his hands were very, very prominent. I preferred the original one, which was a bit darker, but each to their own. You might know the yellow one a little bit more, but I felt from an art history point of view, and particularly what I grew up and studied more of, which was the Baroque art, I really liked the dark and light. So I liked trying to make the jacket, but I didn't like the process really. It was a challenge to get all those little cracks across the texture and the weave, and I got it close, not perfect. The hat was a pain. It was so dark to work with, but he creates a kind of volume to the curve which was really, really quite hard to recreate without it looking like he's wearing some kind of 12-gallon hat going on. But I kind of got there roughly in the end, but it did take a bit of effort. So remember, just keep ploughing on, keep chipping away, and you will get there eventually. So we said we'd come back to Art History Corner, as I'm kind of now calling it, to deal a little bit more and talk a little bit more about Ducrot and Mr. Beast himself and the links between the two. So, as you know, or you might not know, years after his death, Ducrot had a bit of a surge in popularity. This was mainly 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more. The internet memes kind of became very, very prominent, with everyone sending them to everyone's mom and friend, and with jokey things, and some of them rude and some of them not. And it was this particular painting of his smug little jolly face looking back out at you that captured the kind of moment, and it was used on, I think, a rapper at the time, if I remember rightly, put his lyrics over the top of it, and all of a sudden a meme was born. and it went like wildfire around the world. And it kind of relates back to when he first showed these kind of trony paintings of himself in these various poses, that he was seen as a bit of a strange spectacle. But really, it's the humor within them. It seemed to really fit with the modern day internet and the internet that we know now, where people do make a bit of a spectacle of themselves and become famous for it. And it kind of linked to Mr. Beast in a way that he has used the internet and YouTube predominantly to become a bit of a spectacle himself, and to the point that he's become memes, and his thumbnails have become a huge part of this, that they are so recognizable, you don't even have to think about it. And I'm sure if you are on YouTube, you'll know Mr. Beast. If you don't, or you're of a certain vintage, or you don't really care for things like that, Mr. Beast he has the most subscribers on YouTube at the moment. He is hugely famous. His videos are everything from computer game kind of silly things and prank videos. A lot of them where he gives away huge sums of money or does tasks to people. He does a lot of philanthropy. He does various challenges and stunts and things like this, and he has attracted millions and millions of viewers and subscribers. And you know, the link between the two kind of grows, that they both, Ducrot and both Mr. Beast, use their creativity and humor to entertain and engage their audiences. They both have a unique style and an identity that sets them apart from others in their field, and paved the way for others to follow. I think a lot of people have copied Ducrot's work over the time. He influenced a huge amount of artists throughout art history. And Mr. Beast is doing exactly the same. He has changed the way people think about YouTube. He has changed the format, the way people deliver information, the speed at which they do things, how they introduce videos, of which I don't really pay too much attention to, because I don't want to create fast videos. I want to create long form videos where we learn a little bit and do things a bit differently, but each to their own. But also in his thumbnails and the way he presents them, Mr. Beast has created a movement. People study how he makes these kind of thumbnails and how he uses his face. So the physiognomy that Ducrot was absolutely obsessed with, it can be seen throughout Mr. Beast's work, and it really sets them apart from others in their field. They're not afraid to express themselves and to try new things, and they have a positive attitude towards life. And I think it's testament to their characters, really, that they've gone their own way and they've not, followed the trends of the time. They've done their own thing and it's worked in the end. And I think that's much like how I kind of have approached my YouTube channel. I looked at all these videos of how you make YouTube videos and what you should do, and you need to do the title within the first 5 seconds and do all these fast cuts and everything, and that's not really me. My video, my Lane Decker Kami video, I just did what I felt from my heart, and it seemed to work. It's gone a bit crazy on the numbers, and I really hope you guys enjoy this process, this style of my video, the long form, with me kind of whittering on, and I hope we're learning a little bit as well along the way. But do let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see me tackle another artist, another famous person, if you want me to do more traditional tutorials, more on the programs I use. Let me know. I am going to be committing a lot more time to my videos in the coming months, because this particular video has come out way too late. My last video was over 2 weeks ago, and I was prepped and ready to do something completely different for my next video, and I landed 2 jobs, which is great, of course, because I've got kids to feed and bills to pay, but I had to put the YouTube video on the back burner for a little while. And in a little moment between the 2 jobs, this is when I came up with this idea for the Mr. Beast Ducrot mashup. But yeah, I am going to be committing a lot more time to it. So please do let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see and what you like, what you don't like. And as you can see through my previous videos, I do try and answer as many comments as I possibly can. So, and also really thank you. I really should say, to all new subscribers, people who've liked it, and people who've commented. It absolutely blew me away, the response to the last video, to the point I was almost a little bit shocked and got a bit of the second album syndrome. What the hell do I do now? But it's given me a platform to grow on. I hope you really like this kind of playful format that we do. We're not trying to create masterpieces here. I'm trying to show techniques, skills, an introduction to digital art in a playful, fun way, and hopefully that's conveyed, and we can learn a little bit about art history, we can learn a little bit about digital art in a slightly different format. So I'm pretty happy with the way things have gone so far, and we get to the stage of the painting that I really enjoy, and this is where it kind of starts to come alive. So as you can see, I'm just finishing off a few little details, a few little touches, but it's in this last stage of adding the kind of depth and darkness and textures that the painting kind of starts to spring off the canvas and really looks 3D and just looks more finished and more like the original painting. And there's various ways you can tackle this. You could use multiply layers, usually on an opacity of 50%, and that kind of shades over without, tinting what's below it, or you can add a hue to it. But in this instance, I created a new layer and dropped the opacity down slightly and just painted over it slightly darker. I wanted the colors that I've used before to kind of shine through, and I wanted to create the kind of, there's an Italian term called chiaroscuro, which was mainly for kind of Baroque art, really. But that is, it translates as light and dark, and it refers to the balance and pattern of light and shade in a painting or drawing. And as you can see here, when I emphasize that dark side to him, all of a sudden, he springs out. It creates that depth that really wasn't there. And if you bring that shadow round his shoulder blades and round his waist and across the brim of his hat and his arm that's pointing to you, it kind of molds the figure into the background and heightens the highlights, if you will, more so. Your eye is kind of led around the canvas now. You see him coming out of the gloomy background rather than just being plonked on a kind of photographer's background, if you will. So again, I've kind of gone over it with a new layer, and I'm roughly painting it in, and back to our trusty friend the palette knife shortly, where I scrub it and rough it up a little bit and create a new layer on top. See, so because before when I was blending it together, there was so much of the red hues, you can see there still creeping in. Any of the browns I'd used in the background were blending and becoming too red, and we lost that kind of murky green color that was present in both the light Ducrot and the dark version there. So this is where I've created an opacity layer on top. I set it to about 60%, I think, and painted on top with some dark colors, some dark kind of greens and ochres and some oranges, just to kind of warm it up, but so you could see what was underneath it, but it wasn't so tinted brown, and again, it makes the figure leap off the canvas a little bit more. With this technique, you don't have to be too careful. You can go over certain areas because you've used an opacity. And again, I went over some of the bits of the knuckles and around the hat to kind of soften them back into the background. And if you use a similar color, so if you use a color from one side of the dark, you can hark it on the other side, and it creates a kind of coherency across the canvas that a lot of artists like to use, that you don't want one area to be too jarring to the other, you want it to kind of flow. So this is where I started doing a little bit of more depth and a bit more using the opacity layer on the jacket to kind of create that kind of weave that as we spoke about earlier, we were struggling with a little bit. But always remember, if you do go over any of the highlighted bits like the buttons and stuff, you'll see in a second that I brought up the eraser tool and rubbed out the opacity to let them kind of sing through a little bit brighter again. You don't want to dull it all down, you just want to dull down the areas of shadow. As you can see, I'm feverishly working away on this silly hat. I don't know what you call that kind of style of hat. It's a cracker. I mean, probably would wear it, but I struggled with this. It was very hard. So in the end, kind of knocked it back a bit more into the background, probably than I should have. But trying to create that little 3D thing, maybe if I'd have had a little bit more time. This painting was created, someone asked me on my last video how long the actual painting took. This one, I think, was about between 4 or 5 hours, maybe. In total, I had a bit of time between client work where I was waiting on response from one client on a job and hadn't started the other one because I didn't have all the information. So rather than just sit and twiddle my thumbs or play the Xbox or PlayStation or something like that, let's get a painting done. There's always a moment. There's always time for a quick doodle. So I was really working the jacket there, and as you see, save as you go. Oh, don't forget that. I was really working the jacket, trying to emphasize the texture, emphasize the scratchiness of it. And you'll see in a second that I used a modern technique, which would be frowned upon by the masters maybe, or maybe they'd love it, who knows, where I wanted to add a little bit of grit, as if that painting of Mr. Beast, my one, has been hung on a wall for ages. So I got a gritty texture and I overlaid it over the top and set the blend level by clicking the little file sign on the layers to multiply, and knocked it down to, I think it was about 40%, but have a play, have a tinker with it and see what works. And then on the areas I wanted to highlight, I erased certain bits just to kind of bring the knuckles up, as you can see how I'm doing, and some of the shoulder blades because I didn't want it to be too dark. And there we have it. Now, it's not perfect. It's pretty good. I'm quite happy with it. But it was a lot of fun to do, and I learned a lot through doing it. And as I just revisited, you can see on the canvas, it's never fully finished. You can always go back and keep touching things up. But I was pretty happy with it overall. It's fun. It's a playful look at it. Mr. Beast, if you're looking at it, I do apologize. But if you do like it, send me a message and I'll frame it up for you. But thanks to everyone for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please do all the YouTube shenanigans things like and subscribe and all that. Really want to keep growing this channel, and with your support we can do so. It means an awful lot to me, so thank you once again, and especially for sticking to the end of these long form videos. I know they are quite long. And there we have it, the final painting. And as we said before, it's painfully up close, but as we zoom out, it becomes close to the masterpiece, not quite. So thank you once again.